everybody. Thanks for joining another episode of the PM Learning Series. My name is Shavi. I'm the host of the show. As many of you know, the PM Learning Series is a series of live streaming events where industry thought leaders and practitioners share their PM career journey or engineering product building journey and lessons learned to inspire current and aspiring product builders like you to level up your product game. As many of you know, that we started a new special series featuring product builders from all sort of leading generative AI companies, from startups like Copy.ai, Synthesia, to incumbents like Microsoft Teams or Instacart, to tell them to explore the challenges and opportunities of how this transformative technology is shaping the future of design, products, and experiences, and gain insights from those leading the charge, at the forefront of generative AI development. And with that, today we have a very special guest. In a moment, I'll bring him up to the stream. But please make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find the link in the events details page. You can receive key takeaways from today's recap, as well as signing up and staying tuned for future event updates. So please introduce yourself. Drop in the chat where you're joining us from. I know that today we have a little bit of earlier programming for those in the Pacific Coast, but we usually have viewers from all over the world. So hope many of you can still join us today. And with that, let me bring him up to the stream. Hi, Stef. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Shvi. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. It's really honored to have you. I know sometimes it takes a minute for the comments to kick in. So folks, when you're joining us, please introduce yourself, where you're joining us from. And Stef is the head of Roblox Studio / Generative AI. You were also former head of augmented reality at Adobe and Adobe Arial. You're very passionate about immersive and new media, as well as animation. You are a visual artist, angel investor, startup advisor. And fun fact, you were paragliding champion in your previous life. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you then transition into tech and, animation?
A previous life. I think I started when I was 19, so it was definitely a previous life.
Wow.
I think paragliding is all about tech, science, understanding the weather and the technology of these, beautiful flying machines. And I think it teaches you a lot of risk management. So I think it's good. It's a good training ground for entrepreneurs.
That's awesome. I know folks are starting to chime in and dropping in the chat to introduce themselves. We have a couple folks from Bangalore, India. It's 9:30 on a Friday night, so thank you for joining us. There's folks from Germany, which with daylight saving, it's 5 p.m. again on Friday night. There's folks from Seattle joining us from Nigeria, Houston, Scotland, Brazil. Wow. Thank you so much, folks, for joining us. Please continue to drop in the chat, introduce yourself, and what questions you might have for Stef. So, Stef, this is a really, really exciting topic. As we told you, I actually want to survey folks. Besides introducing yourself, if you're a gamer, please drop in the chat, +1 telling us, how much you play games. So, Stef, I wanted to talk about, sort of your vision for Roblox Studio. But maybe before we do that, what's best to bring it live with a video? So I'm going to play a video for the community to kind of bring the cool capability live. So let me start that. Okay, let's start from the beginning. I remember the first time seeing this video was on an X thread. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. Like, for the first time, I feel like I could create games, and then we have someone, Annie, joining from Melbourne, Australia at 3 a.m. Thank you, folks. But with that, Stef, let's talk about, since you're the head of Roblox Studio, tell us a little bit about your vision for the future of the studio. And then particularly, how are you integrating AI and generative AI into that vision, how does that fit into the broader Roblox ecosystem with the communities and everything? Yeah.
That's a great question. So our vision is we want to enable the creation of anything, anywhere, and by anyone. And so generative AI, just an AI in general, really helps democratize creation in a way that is unprecedented, where just using, for example, a natural language interface, you can create words, you can create code, you can create 3D objects, you can texture them, and then you can place them and arrange them in the world, all through like the most simple user interface, which is just talking to someone like we are used to do, since we are born. And so we are finding that there is basically a little bit of a gap between our players. We have hundreds of millions of those every month joining the platform, and then the millions they can create in studio, because at the end, it's a professional tool that people have to learn. And so we think AI will help like bridge that gap, and we want to bring more creation, enable more creation in experiences them directly, as well as making studio more accessible through AI. And so we are kind of working like in both direction to really smooth out the on-ramp to creation, because we found that many more people than we think want to create, not just play, and they want to be active and create content themselves. And so we want to enable that.
That's amazing. I love the vision. It's a very powerful one to enable people to create. So let's talk a little bit about, since the launch of the video, was it just pure demo, or has the experience live? Are you getting, what kind of user feedback are you getting from the community? Do you see people starting to create more games, or is it mostly still power creators using it? So what have been the reactions? Any interesting insight, surprising insight?
Absolutely. So right now, what we have in market today is the creation of materials, PBR materials, as well as code. And so we have seen for materials, for example, an increase by 50% of the number of materials that people create. And those materials are PBR, so they reflect the light properly. They look much better in the game than if you just add color or just a simple diffuse texture. And then for code as well, we are seeing an incredible increase in productivity. And those are the first two. What you've seen in the video, we have it already running internally. We are getting a lot of feedback. We are trying to figure out, when we're gonna launch it. We are, tweaking every day and making more intuitive and smoother. But that will be like another big step where we will enable like a really like full end-to-end complete workflows from asset creation to scene creation to interactivity, all through like just a simple natural language interface. And also, it's going to be a great tool for people to learn, right? You can ask questions about, hey, how do I do this thing? And you get the explanation directly there where you need it. You don't have to go, in Google, random forums post and try to understand if that information that is like 3 years old is still applies.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think our community resonated with our community as gamers. They're excited to create their own worlds, right? That bring the imagination life, visualizing it. We'll come back to talk about some of the tech stack, because I'm interested in that. But you mentioned about user feedback, and you have kind of launched it internally as well as maybe a small beta. How do you ensure that you're working with the right kind of gamers or users and creators, and how do you incorporate that feedback? How do you balance kind of the human creativity, right, and the automation? Oh, you just type a prompt and then something just gets created. Tell us a little bit about kind of the process of how you incorporating user feedback into the process.
So that's a good question. So the most important thing is to close the loop, right? And so we have to find signals while people are using AI to understand where we're doing a good job and where we're not, right? That's just the basis of training and retraining and fine tuning. And so for materials, when they write a prompt, we give 4 options for material. They can also decide to generate, 8 options or 20, and then we track which one they choose, right? And so based on that, we know, oh, this generation was better than these other 3 or these other 5. And so we incorporate that information. We also add in the classic, thumbs up and down, of course, in the interface. For code, it's a little bit similar, where usually acceptance rates are around like 30%. I mean, people would think like that it's a low number, but actually it's pretty good, because the suggestions for the code happen in like a split second, and so you can just tab and accept it, or just do spacebar and ignore it. And so there we are also tracking what suggestions were actually used and people saved versus the ones that were discarded, right? And so those are pretty strong signals if we did a good job or not. And so then with that data, we incorporate it into our next training or our next fine tuning, and then we improve the model that way. And then it's just rinse and repeat. And so over time, we can tweak and make it better and better in the performance. And we have seen improvements from when we launched to now. They are like double digits. So definitely very, very significant.
That's amazing. So you talk a little bit more about using this data-driven approach to enhance the user feedback. I'm curious if you are also doing, I'm sure you are, but I'm curious about the process, if you're also doing sort of more qualitative user feedback to understand what kind of prompts do they use, or what kind of scenarios they like. To tell us a little bit about that process, like in terms of like not just fine tuning and like making the training model better, but thinking about what would be the next iteration, what are the next use case that you want to tackle. How does that process look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So every week we have a briefing done by our design researchers. They basically talk to a pool of people, and then they basically explore, UX. They look at the whole workflow, and then they report back, and they basically brief product engineering and then design. So this is like the quantitative study is like an ongoing process. Like every week we heard back, because what I mentioned before is just a feedback loop on the training on the model, but there's a whole UX universe to be rediscovered, basically, because AI is just completely changing the way we interface with digital tools. And so right now we're just making broad assumptions that people will use it in some way, but it may be completely wrong. We may be building like the faster horse instead of the car, right? And so we want to basically build the simplest UX with the least amount of assumptions, put it in front of users, see how they are using themselves without telling them how to do it. And then from there, sometimes we had like those aha moments where instead of going from A to B through like this super torturous, path, we come out with like the straight line. Like, oh, what, just because they have been doing this in the past in this way, it doesn't have to be the same. And we can remove entire parts of the workflow now and just have tech do it automatically for them. One example that I like to bring up is creating UV maps and rigging. Those two tasks are highly technical and they have very little artistic input. And if we can just remove them completely from the workflow, we're just doing a great favor to everybody. And then they can always export that into their tool and tweak it. But from a workflow perspective, they're just basically, 2, 3, 4 hours blocks that just remove you from the flow, right? So we want to leave people in the flow of creation as much as possible and get something in front of them as fast as we can since the inception of the idea, right? And then they can always go in and refine it. But that time is so precious when you're in the flow. We don't want to like take you away from that.
That's awesome. I know that Anton just asked a brilliant question, which I'll bring it up in the stream in a moment. But I do wanted to give a shout out from Jasmine's 9-year-old, telling you that she's a huge fan of you. So thank you so much, Steph, and thanks, Jasmine. Steph, let's talk about some of the foundational stuff first, and then we will come to like how close we are to a future where everybody can create games and this magic just happened. But tell us a little bit about the technology elements, right? Give us like a 101, like what are the critical elements of a tech stack that kind of power this kind of massive scale generative game creation? What are some limitations right now that inherent in some of this tech, and what is it going next?
That's a good question. So if we zoom out like very high level, we basically have like two main technologies that are basically allowing us and other developers to create basically end-to-end solutions for creating content and interactivity. Those big ingredients are LLMs, large language models, as well as image generation AI pipelines, right? Stable diffusion and those kind of things. So uh, by just combining those two ingredients in very different ways, you can get to generate images, you can get to generate 3D models, you can get to generate code and all that. And so those are like the high level ingredients. Some, in some pipelines, we may use, multiple LLMs, maybe one manages, the high level orchestration, try to figure out what the user wants to do, understand the intent, be able to have a conversation. And then others could be very focused on a specific task. And they can be, smaller models that we tune just for the task of, let's say, generating a material or generating a 3D models and so on. And so it's kind of a little bit of a mix of different types of those elements that kind of come together to generate like a full cohesive solution. Of course, from the user perspective, there's just one simple interface, but under the hood, we are there are a lot of components, and we are constantly swapping them out for a better one, and we are constantly A/B testing new solutions. So it's really like very much an iterative process. And as we said, publicly, we are using a mixture of models that we develop internally, and then models that are existing, in the wild. We are part of the some open source initiatives like StarCoder, for example. We believe in the open source community and effort, and I think it's gonna really help everybody. And ultimately, we are a platform, so we now are doing this as a first party because we are just learning how to plumb the whole thing together. But we want to allow any developer in the world to, in the future, plug in their own AI service into our platform to either empower our creators or also empower our players. And so that is the long-term direction. Right now, we are kind of learning it ourselves, but we are through platforms, so we want to open up in the future for anyone. And our creators, since the beginning, have done this, and they figure out a way to basically connect and integrate, ChatGPT into their games, and we have seen all kind of awesome generative AI stuff that is happening in the games already.
That's awesome. I'll come to Anton's question in a moment. And you mentioned already, I love the platform vision is very powerful, and that's kind of the backbones of Roblox, right? Being this engine, being this community, this platform. You mentioned there's already people trying different things, and you trust open source. There's definitely a lot of probably very interesting insights, expected ways. What would you say? Can you give us some examples of like interesting, surprising, challenging use cases that people have been using the tech to build? Anything that you notice?
Yeah, there's a developer called Infinite Canvas. They created basically a game where, as part of that, there's a fighting part of the game, and then you basically can create your own weapon, so your own sword or your own knife or whatever it is that fits the game. But basically, you go in there, you sketch it. From the sketch, they create a 3D model. That 3D model is equipped to your avatar, and depending what you design, you have different, power in using the weapon, against the enemies in the game. So that's, I think, a really cool example. We also, another one that we have seen is called Doodle, and that one really blew my mind and got massive adoption, where you actually go to this place with a bunch of other avatars, and you can socially interact, and then you can sketch. You can literally sketch your avatar, like you can do, with like a paintbrush in Photoshop, and then that gets converted into an actual avatar that you become, and then you can save it also in your inventory. And so you see all these people running around. They are basically look like hand-drawn avatars, and some people came up with like very creative ideas, and we saw thousands of those being built every day. And it was it was the environment in the game on Roblox with the biggest variety of avatar look that I've ever seen. And so that was really very exciting too.
That's awesome. I want to take two questions from the community because I think they're great and adds the discussion. And so for folks if you have questions for Stef, please drop them in the chat so that we can feature them from time to time. Now, without further ado, I know Anton dropped this question a while ago. how close are we to a future where game designers can just focus on like imagining about this game, right? Defining the fundamental rules, and the game just can create itself, and the experience would just happen. Like, are we barely scratching the surface of the technology? How far away are we from realizing this? Like, I can spend a Saturday afternoon and just be in the flow for a couple hours and creating this magic world.
We are not that far. We're definitely now we have line of sight. We see the light at the end of the tunnel that we probably didn't see like a year ago. So that's kind of very exciting. Our North Star, that we always talk about is I want to take a chapter of a book from Tolkien, like The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, just put the text in it, and I want that world to be created automatically, and then also with all the interactivity. So the orcs come after me, and like this Gandalf there that has magic powers can help me, and so on. And so that's kind of the vision. I think one piece that is missing, which is text to 3D model generation, I think will land this year in 2024. We have seen already like massive improvements going from Nerf technology to Gaussian splatter, and I think we are just like one step away from having that component. And so at that point, you can really generate those words, and then you can generate code. And so basically, you'll be very close to this scenario that Anton is mentioning. So I would say probably we will see like full end-to-end workflows fully complete by end of next year, and then probably another couple of years to really like again rethink the UI and the user experience, where there's maybe like a chat environment where you define interactively the rules, and then the rules get applied, as opposed to generating directly the code. First, you probably want to iterate on like principles and rules, and then that thing AI will take and generate like the full set of code for the world. So we're not at that level where AI also understands how all the pieces come together. It's easy to generate code for one game object, but it's harder to do it for like a full game orchestration. And so I think that for that, probably a couple of years will be needed.
I wanted to summarize it.
I want to say hi to Karim, long-time friend from like 20 plus years ago from Italy.
Yes, I have his question is the next one, but I just want to summarize, I think, what I heard and my reaction, probably the community's reaction about how mind-blowing this tech can be and the speed at what it's happening, right? So you mentioned about green. I do wanted to ask a little bit about, you mentioned about this kind of platform nature, you guys leading the front, kind of testing the technology. I'm curious about like, so let's say outside of gaming, which I know less than like traditional business, we heard a lot about this notion of like a moat or competitive differentiation in the Gen AI space. In the previous episode, we talked to people who are more in the content generation space or workflow productivity. Or like there's a lot of people talk about like it's really hard for generative AI company to build moats compare with incumbent, which Roblox sort of have like this existing distribution. But how do you see sort of the competition and the role Roblox play compared to, let's say, more like video generation company like the Synthesia, the Runway ML, the more research tool based, where they might not have the community, and then Roblox being having the game engine, the platform, and the marketplace, and then like traditional gaming companies like Blizzard, like Activision Blizzard and EA and Microsoft Games, like what is the competitive landscape look like, and then how you see Roblox playing a role in here and the vision around that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So what we are seeing is quite interesting, because for the longest time, the tech was the differentiating factor, and it was really hard to maybe match a company that will come out with like a breakthrough. Instead, now we are seeing the opposite, where like tech is becoming commoditized so fast. Like there will be a startup with a breakthrough for, I don't know, video stylized generation, and then 3 days later, right, a paper will come out, and then there's like 10 other companies doing the same thing. I look at this Gaussian splatter evolution in text to 3D generation. I think the paper came out like 2 weeks ago, and then we have been working on it internally, and then there are like already companies pushing it out as a service. So that iteration speed is super fast. I think it's going to be hard to protect anything, because there's this like magic flow where like the tide is just coming up for everybody. And so the thing that is really the differentiator is the data. Because if you don't have the data, even if you have the best LLM, you can't train it, right? And we have seen that training at scale requires an enormous amount of data. And so Roblox is uniquely positioned, and we are training our own internal models as well, of course, but we are uniquely positioned to create a multi-model generative AI model for all type of content, because we have images, code, 3D models, we have audio, we have avatars, we have like all kind of types. And so instead of creating tools that just generate images or 3D models or audio, we're actually able to train a model on multimodal input and output, so that it can create full experiences, because we have access to full experiences with the permission of our community. We always ask for permission, but there are, just to give you a sense of the scale, there are 15 million experiences on the platform that people have played in the last year, not the ones that exist, the ones that actually people play. And then there's about 90,000 added every day. So the scale of the content is massive. We don't need to use all that content to train. Even like a small fraction will be a lot of data. And so we can really focus on training a multimodal model that creates like fun games that have high engagement and high retention, and then people really want to play. And so that's why we are thinking we have we are uniquely positioned. We have a unique competitive advantage compared to other players in the space.
That's awesome. And then just your answer to the previous question to Anton, and there's a thank you, and this is a very exciting future. So, Stef, we have mostly talked about good things, all the amazing, mind-blowing power. Let's switch gear a little bit just to keep it real, talking about sort of the ethical side of AI. We have one question. There's a couple questions there I wanted to ask, but one question from the community around you just mentioning about data. There might be a lot of people creating stuff. Is there any sort of copyright issues or challenges that you guys are working with around like what you can use for training and the attribution of some of those credits back? And how does the gaming industry thinking about some of those?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, with great power comes great responsibility. So at the same time, we are going to really blow up the creative capabilities for any creator on the platform, but we also want to make sure the platform stays safe, inclusive. All right, and then basically people can play those new experiences with all this new generation of user-generated content in a way that respects the principles of safety, inclusion, and civility on the platform. So that's super important. So we have an effort that is probably as big as the one on creation for like safety and ethics on the platform, that is also using a whole lot of machine learning and AI, because it's basically the two are like two a little bit competing efforts, and so we have to really up our game on that front. One thing I want to say is, from our perspective, we have seen that there were initial, early models out there that asked for permission, some that didn't, some that just scraped all the content from the internet. And so our stance was that we will always ask for the permission to our community in order to use that data. And so an example was the campaign we did, we launched in September around our developers conference, where we basically ask people to contribute code for not only for us to train our LLMs to generate code, but also potentially to create an open source data set. Because ultimately, we want all the LLMs in the world to know how to make games for Roblox, right? We don't want to just use it for our own, but we want, the future GPTs and the future Claude, like all these models, to potentially know about Roblox. So it will be a knowledge that we spread, and it's pervasive, and is using, no matter what tool our creators use, those LLMs in the future can help them. And we want, again, we are a platform. And so in order to do that, we ask our community, hey, can you give us your code for training, or can you also give us your code so that we can make a public data set? And we have found that the vast majority of people that gave the code actually wanted to give it to the open source effort. And it was very touching. The they really understood the intent of really basically elevate the game creation, the Roblox game creation capabilities to basically worldwide knowledge. And so that's kind of the direction we are going. We are trying not only to ask for data, ask our community for permission to use their data to train, but ideally we want to actually take it out into the world, and so more people can actually train, and like researchers in the world can like train on Roblox data, and there will be better tools for our creators coming out.
Yeah, I love the ethos of like the open source community, because it's like lifting all boats, right? Everybody sharing, and it's an open environment. I know that you mentioned earlier a little bit about the AI ethics, and we got some critical questions about sort of the notion of content moderation, especially a lot of people on Roblox are probably teenagers. How is the company using what sort of tools to help protect, let's say, unintended or harmful, inappropriate content on the platform?
That's a good question. So at the end, inclusivity, informed consent, privacy, safety, these are all in our DNA, right? And so these are all principles that we want to defend very strongly. And our goal is to bring a billion people together with civility and optimism. And so in order to do that, we have a lot of what we call manual moderation of experiences, of assets, and then the data coming out of that feeds like AI, so we can automate that at scale. Because in the future, we are projecting an explosion in the number of experiences that people will publish on the platform. I said 90,000 per day at the moment, and so some of the action to keep it safe are reactive, and some are proactive. And so we want to increase the number of proactive moderation, where we catch the before anyone sees it, and we are basically training in a very unique way. We are training very deep AI models to do exactly that. And so they learn from human moderation. They also learn like who the creator is. They have access to history, and so they can make in a split second we can do real-time moderation and really make a call if that content is potentially harmful or not. And then if it is potentially harmful, then AI can take it and bring it to a human moderator to give a look right away before it's even reported. And so that kind of like proactive moderation, I think, is going to be key in the future to really like keep the. We are constantly tracking the number of safety of experiences, and it's always going up, and we want to keep it basically that way.
That's awesome. Okay, so we talk about sort of the exciting future of generative AI or gameplay empowered by generative AI. We talk about some of the challenges and ethics, and how Roblox is preparing for it. Let's switch gears to talk about a little bit about the org and the processes that the company is building. So earlier you mentioned about how you're doing multiple iterations of A/B testing. The pace of the technology that's happening, it's crazy, right? Like people call it AI arm race, or you call it tech is being commoditized. What kind of team, like that you need to set up to help people build those skills to work together, especially in a cross-functional capacity, leading this kind of generative AI initiative, like across maybe product development, like data science, machine learning, AI product, but also like with sales, like marketing, and the whole org. Tell us a little bit about what does the generative AI product squad looks like, and how people work together.
That's a great question. So I will say one thing first, like from the speed at which things are going now, like basically nothing takes more than 3 months anymore. Used to be like, oh, we're gonna work for a year on this thing. I'm like, no. Like everything now is possible in a matter of like days, and so you can go from like idea to shipping in like as little as 3 months. I mean, I can tell you like one anecdote on our material generator. I think it was like December when we came together and said, hey, I think the tech is ready for this, and we had done some early tests, and then in March this was we shipped it, right? So the key now is like fast iteration, and sometimes the harder thing is you have like a very cross-functional team working all in real time at the same time. You don't have like, okay, now the designer, the user, a researcher does the research, figure out what we need. The designer and product people get together, design, creates like some UX, products look at it, then it goes to the engineering. Like the designer is designing on not where the tech is now, is designing on where the tech is going to be in 2 months when we ship. And so it's all like we're all building the car as the car is racing, at 200 miles an hour. And so I think that's the new challenge, is that you have to really think about user flows of tomorrow, because by the time you ship, there's going to be a much better AI model, and updating the AI model is going to take a few hours. And so you're basically like swapping the engine of the car as you're going, and so you have to like design the tires to be a lot bigger and thicker, and be able to and the transmissions to be thicker, because the engine is going to be swapped out, and now it's a V6, it's going to be a V12 in like a month, right? And so I think that's the challenge. Everybody in the team needs to develop that mindset of like really designing a little bit ahead of the curve. Yes, right now this workflow feels a little bit clunky because, I don't know, generation of this thing takes 2 minutes. Who wants to wait for 2 minutes? Oh, in 3 months it's going to take like 5 seconds. Don't worry. Like, trust me. The engineer will say, trust me, this is going to take five seconds. So let's design for that, right? And so that, I think, is the challenge. It's not only like you have to be incredibly cross-disciplinary from the beginning, get everybody like you can break down skills in silos. You have to favor as much cross-pollination as possible, but you also are designing for the future, and like iteration is key. So every week you put this thing in front of real users, you get feedback, rinse and repeat.
I love the working together and just kind of like planning ahead. The fast iteration, I think it's what was really eye-opening and different for this wave of technology. Um, we have a question from the community, actually a couple ones related to a similar theme. Um, and then let's pick out this particular one, since it's a follow-up to kind of like this fast iteration. So what are some key skills, I guess not just for PMs, but also anybody kind of working with like generative AI tech, that needs to develop and not feel like burnout because everything is happening so fast all at once? So what are some technical skills that someone needs to build or embrace mindset to work with this tech?
Yeah, and my number one recommendation will be to try to be as hands-on as possible, because as I said before, like those like silos of skills, or like these layers of process, are going to be completely disrupted. And then basically the PM needs to be like so deep vertically and understand, like not only understand what the user wants, but actually be hands-on with the tool, because he or she will get to try the tool before it goes in front of people, and it needs to kind of develop like the sensitivity for who the customer is in a way that is even deeper than what was required probably in the past. And I think it's also important for the product manager to be not only deep in that sense, but also be very broad. So really like pick up more about like the design process and UX, and more about like engineering, not in the sense of like writing the code, but really being up to speed about what new technology is popping up. And so surveying a lot of like new startups and what's coming out is super important, because not only we see new technologies popping up again at the speed of light, 2 weeks after a paper gets released, but also every startup is coming up with maybe completely different UX. And so sometimes the solution is the combination of a few different approaches, right? And so I think the new, in order to be competitive, again, it's like get your hands dirty into the tool, into the creation, create stuff yourself, like on a daily basis, so you really can understand like the nitty-gritty details of the workflow, and then go abroad in like constantly get your Twitter feed or like LinkedIn to monitor what's coming up, and then try all these new products. I think it's really key to not just like see what people say about them, but actually try them out, go on Discord, understand how people think about them, how they use them. And I think that will inform then this kind of like overall synthesis of what the best product could be in that space, and then be open for that to change like in the next month. So again, going back to fast iteration.
Yeah, I love that, being hands-on and being broad, right? Like to be able to test different technology and stay abreast with that. Um, we are almost coming up on time, so I'm going to wrap up with two big questions, big block of question. I think one question, both sort of audience asking, is the notion around. I want to reframe the question a little bit around what gets you most excited about the future of gaming. Like, is there like an element of, say, what this LinkedIn user was saying, adaptive gameplay? So every game is sort of personalized to some extent, real time for a player. What else that gets you sort of? What's the future of gaming that makes you most excited with this new technology?
Yeah, adaptive gameplay. It's a super interesting concept. Imagine like not only if the game is tailored to you, but every time you play that game, it's a different game, right? So the game learns who you are, maybe also what you like, but also like the characters maybe have a slightly different personality, or they can go even deeper into the character. So we're definitely looking into that. There's work around using LLMs to create non-playable characters for the game, so they are actually smart, they have understanding of the word, and you can actually have meaningful conversations with them, and they still keep their personality that ties into the gameplay. So that area of LLMs basically as a service to power up non-playable characters, I think is going to be pretty huge, and it's going to empower this idea of like evolving storylines, evolving challenges, personalized experiences right there on the fly. And so we have found, from data games, they basically there's a race to push new content every week. And so that's kind of the old way to think about it. Like, okay, I mean, like more challenges, more characters, more pets, a lot of that on Roblox. But then there's a flip side, and maybe a more future vision of that, which is the content is roughly the same, right? But the gameplay is changing, and then as part of the gameplay, new assets get generated, as opposed to being like just a content drop, from the developer. Like you can shape the story, and then there will be a new characters interacting with you with new personality as the story evolves. And so there's really like basically creativity is the limit. I think we are going into an era where it's really all about the ideas and coming out with like original, interesting ideas, and the technicality of that will be basically commodity. So it's really going to go back to, I think it's going to empower everybody with a great idea to create great games, and without the big barrier of what is technically achievable by that person. So
Yeah, I love that. It's like the
yeah,
sky is the limit.
the sky's the limit for sure.
Yeah, in our earlier show, we actually talked to the VP of product at Microsoft Teams. We had the similar question around like skills that's needed, and he said, "Hey, technical understanding only achieved so far, but it's really like what you said, like how big can you dream?" Is going to be the next level that differentiate, I guess, a good PM versus a great PM. Well, coming up, towards the end, I really want to ask you, sort of, Steph. Like we talk a lot about Roblox vision for gaming, how generative AI works, teams, skills. I would love to get a little bit personal and maybe a moment of vulnerability, if you will. Sort of some of your top reflection over the past years working with this tag with teams. What were some of the pivotal moments that you feel like you had the most learning, whether it's being the hardest part or a victory or a failure, like that besides being hands-on, like saying keep up with this tech, what are some other stories or a moment of reflection that you could share with the community?
Yeah, I'll say two. One about like a challenge, and one kind of the evolution, I think, of the team itself. And so the challenge is um, this stuff looks so magical, and sometimes we are surprised about how good it is. Right? We tried, we asked our assistant to do something that we haven't even thought about training for, and it can achieve it, and we're like, whoa, it can do this thing, like, and we're like thinking, how can it do it? And so sometimes we get so excited about this, we kind of lost a little bit sight on what is the first user experience for someone that has never seen that. Like, we live in it like every day. And so it's getting a little bit harder, I would say, than before to go through that process where you need to like forget everything tech, everything, and just reconnect with the tool, the interface, in a way that you pretend like you're like a new user. So that exercise becomes harder and harder because, again, we are all like so deep into this, and we have to remember that a lot of people will come to this for the first time, and the tech doesn't matter. All it matters is what they can achieve in the first 20 seconds. Are they engaging? Do they understand what they're supposed to do, and then can they move on? And so again, this process of like resetting, sometimes we stay away from everything for like a day or two and it's trying to get the fresh start. Sometimes we don't get it right, and we just don't see some maybe obvious issues at the beginning of the workflow. So that's one thing to keep in mind that's being sometimes quite challenging. And then the other thing that we realize is the team culture actually evolves as a consequence of working on AI and generative AI, where I found that people develop this comfort for uncertainty. There's a lot of engineers that are very uncomfortable with that. And then at some point, you try to fight it, and then you realize you're really like, building a house on quicksand, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Yes, I mean, there's something you can make your house, float, or you can just, rebuild it super fast. But like, it takes some time, and not everybody in the team will get to that level of comfort at the same time. So something to think about also as the product manager, driving or managing a team, like you have to kind of build that comfort for uncertainty in the team, so the team can really not feel this anxiety or panic, but actually can just embrace that, and then just keep building and throwing away, building and throwing away as a normal process, especially going into the future.
I love that. Basically, like curse of knowledge. Since you know so much living in a technology, sometimes you lose sight of like what a newbie or a new user's experience would be. And I love the being able to be comfortable with uncertainty. I heard that from our team too. It's like you need to learn to embrace improvisation, given the uncertainty. So we're coming up in time. And Steph, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing great insight. I think the community is getting a lot of value from you. Again, for folks, if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter, there will be a key takeaway recaps for our conversation from today, as well as future conversation updates. So please stay tuned, and you can find the link in the event details tab. But with that, Steph, thank you so much again for joining us. This is a really exciting, insightful conversation. So
Thank you
thanks
so much. It
for
was a pleasure.
enlightening us.
It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Everybody, have a great weekend. Bye.